जरूर। तो बिना कोई समय को हम लोग ज़ाया करते हुए अब इस सेशन को शुरू करते हैं। और आज हमारे पास हम लोग सभी एकत्रित हुए हैं PhD वाइवा वोसी के लिए। कनक प्रिया का वाइवा है और उसका टाइटल है थीसिस का इंक्लूसिव एजुकेशन, रोल ऑफ स्टेट एंड सिविल सोसाइटी, a study of the right to education in Purnia, Bihar. Once again, I'll repeat. Kanak Priya's thesis entitled Inclusive Education, Role of the State and Civil Society, a study of the right to education in Purnia district. So in this open online hybrid mode, Viva-Voce, we have all the three reports here which are positive. And today, Viva-Voce is being conducted to assess her work and to grant her the degree of PhD after the Viva-Voce as per the provision of the examiner. Sir, अब मैं मंच आपके हवाले करती हूँ और of course welcoming you to this open PhD Viva-Voce. It's a pleasure to have here for the people gathered here. We have here Professor Dr. Sashikant Pante, Professor and former head, Department of Political Science, Baba Saheb Bhimrao, Lucknow. Welcome you, again, sir, to this platform for this Viva. हमारे साथ हमारे कलीग्स जुड़े हुए हैं फॉर द सुपरवाइजर प्रोफेसर पुष्पलता sir. Besides, we have Professor Rakesh Ranjan, Faculty of Political Science, presently the head Department of Public Administration. Besides, we have Political Science, some other teachers who have recently joined. Ajay Gaurav we have here. Then we have Madhu. We also have Randhir ji. Besides from Public Administration, we have Dr. Riaz, Dr. Aditi, Dr. Pawan, Dr. Subir. All of you are welcome. Besides, I welcome all my research scholars who are here, giving valuable time. And also, we have others who have joined online. Dr. Rishu, Professor Vinay Soren is also joined, senior faculty member of the Department of Political Science. I think most of us, yes, I think I've welcomed all of them. Now we'll hand over the platform to you. मंच आपके हवाले करती हूँ सर, आप उनको assess करें, उनकी work को. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for having me here. And it's a pleasure that, Honorable Vice Chancellor and all of you have given me opportunity to evaluate the thesis of one of my brightest student, Kanak Priya. And fortunately, she was my student here at master's level. And I'm really lucky enough to evaluate her thesis and today to conduct her Viva-Voce. And I'm extremely pleased and delighted that some known faces are there amongst the audience. I know Aditi, I know Riaz, I know Rakesh. Professor Soren visited our department some time back. So many of them are familiar to me, and some of you are now familiar to me. So it's be here and to conduct the Viva of your student. It's always you feel nostalgic, but at the same time, as it is always expected from you, from a researcher, to be impartial while doing your work. So while evaluating her work, I was keeping this in mind, and I was very rigorous and just focus on her work. She has done a very good work, and what I feel that Kanak will present her work and whatever the findings. I have already gone through it and I have submitted my report to the department. And once she gives her presentation, thereafter I have some few queries and questions, and that is how we will proceed. Kanak, one thing I would like to say, no, we are a bit late actually. I have an academic council meeting at 2 p.m., which will be chaired by our Honorable Vice Chancellor. So I want you to very brief and precise, rather than giving a very detailed account of it. It would be better if you can highlight what are your key findings, rather than you can of course mention the chapters, but if you focus primarily on the work that you have done, then it would be uh, good for me, and that will save a lot of time as well. So please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the generous introduction, sir. Good afternoon, one and all, respected PG Head of the Department, Professor Seema Prasad, esteemed faculty members, and dear colleagues. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the external examiner, Professor Shashikant Pandey, sir, for his kind words and for joining us today for this Viva-Voce examination. I also thank Patna University and the PG Department of Political Science for providing me this opportunity to present and defend my doctoral research entitled Inclusive Education, Role of the State and Civil Society, a study of the right to education in Purnia, Bihar. Through this study, I attempt to investigate the critical gap between RTE Act's progressive legislative framework and its ground level implementation in one of the Bihar's most educationally backward districts, that is Purnia. At the outset, I would like to acknowledge the sustained guidance of my supervisor, Professor Dr. Pushpalata Kumari, who has been central to the development of this work. I am equally grateful to Professor Seema Prasad, Professor Shifali Roy, Professor Binay Soren, Professor Rakesh Ranjan, Dr. Aditi, and Dr. Archana for their valuable academic inputs at various stages of this research. This thesis, this research is dedicated to the unseen, unheard millions of children still fighting for a place. May the world soon recognize with the quote of Christine Gregoire. Education is the foundation upon which we build our future. It's a well-known fact that education constitutes a critical determinant of human growth and social progress. However, persistent disparities continue to exist in universalization of primary education, or if we talk about providing quality education to all, irrespective of any discrimination. And if we look closely, then the Right to Education Act of 2009 is a stride in the right direction to address this issue. It provides 6 to 14 years of age of students free and compulsory elementary education. So the policy is targeted at providing equal access of quality education to all children and enhance inclusion in the system. Now here, I'm trying to highlight inclusive education as a reform agenda in Purnia district of Bihar. How it aims to ensure learning opportunities for all children, regardless of socio-economic, cultural, linguistic, or background, or any sort of background. So we can say that it forms a key part of the broad educational reform efforts. Now, what is interesting here is that this study is based on a mixed methods approach. It integrates the quantitative data as well as qualitative data that has been gathered from key stakeholders for a more comprehensive analysis. But if we see the ground level perspective, the findings show that there is a wide we see over here that this naturally leads us to conclude with the observation that effective implementation of RTE Act requires strong coordination among state, civil society, and local communities with regard to issues of educational equity. Moving towards research contextualization, let me briefly walk you through global and constitutional framework. It positions India among 130 plus nations that guarantee free and compulsory education. Under Article 21A, our constitution provides free and compulsory education. And as mentioned earlier, inclusion, it focuses on the inclusion regardless of any background. However, what is striking here is that Bihar, it presents critical case study with 9.9% out of school children, the second highest nationally. And building on this further, if we talk about Punya, it presents a case of educational deprivation with low literacy, gender disparities, making it an ideal site for examining RTE Act's inclusive framework, how it performs in highly disadvantaged and low capacity settings. So this is very important because this research, it examines the fundamental disjuncture between right-based framework and its ground-level implementation. To understand this further, let's now take a look at the structure of the thesis. So this thesis comprises of 6 systematically structured chapters. Chapter 1, that is introduction. Here I have dealt the research foundation, statement of the problem, predefined objectives, research methodology, and hypothesis. So it discusses the significance, scope, and overall structure of the thesis. Chapter 2, that is constitutional perspectives of the Right to Education Act and role of stakeholders. It examines the constitutional foundations of RTE and highlights the conceptual framework and explicit variables that have guided this study. Chapter 3, that is empirical study. This chapter extensively elaborates on research methodology, outlining the research design, methods of sampling, data collection. So we can say that it outlines a structured roadmap for conducting this comprehensive study. Chapter 4, that is data analysis and interpretation. This chapter presents data analysis using SPSS for quantitative data and thematic coding for qualitative insights. It interprets the technical statistical results and presents preliminary findings from both the data strands. Moving in further, chapter 5, that is results and discussions. It synthesizes the results through triangulation, examining how findings validate or challenge the hypothesis. And chapter 6, that is conclusions, findings, summary, and recommendations. So this chapter summarizes the entire study with key findings. It identifies the research constraints and provides policy recommendations and suggests future research directions. Moving on to the next slide, I have identified 4 research gaps, but due to paucity of time, I don't know whether I should discuss it or not. The first gap is limited district level empirics. Earlier research have been done till now only at macro level, that is national level. So this research presents us, that fulfills the spatial gap. Further, there is infrastructure focus and weak theory is there. We are contextualizing right-based approaches. There is interaction of poverty, civil society, state in this research, which has not been done earlier. Now, research questions. So, moving towards research questions that have guided this research. So, the first foremost very important question is, what is the status of Right to Education Act in Pune district of Bihar? What has changed in terms of education after RTE has come into effect? What are the practical problems that are coming in the way of universalization of primary education as per RTE in Pune? Are the intended beneficiaries aware of the Act? Why 25% quota seats are left vacant for children belonging to marginalized sections in spite of rampant poverty in the district? What is the role of state machinery, administrators, and bureaucrats? What are the various measures that could be more useful in successful implementation of these provisions? So these questions, they enable a systematic examination of implementation dynamics across multiple stakeholder perspectives. Having discussed that, here are the research objectives that evaluates the current status of RTE. Now, moving on to research hypothesis. This part of this study focuses on research hypothesis. Three alternate research hypotheses systematically examine governance structures, awareness mechanisms, and institutional commitment as critical determinants of RTE implementation efficacy. There is null hypothesis, there is alternate hypothesis. The first and foremost hypothesis being the successful implementation of Section 12(1)(c) of the RTE Act requires concerted efforts of the state machinery at all levels. The second hypothesis states that the success rate of the schemes and mechanisms depend upon the awareness of the beneficiaries and role of civil society in making the beneficiaries aware, as they are mostly socio-economic destitutes. The third one being holistic development in the field of education can be achieved through the earnest efforts of the educational institutions, especially the willingness of the private schools in implementing the aforementioned section of the Act. So, coming to theoretical and conceptual framework, this study employs a multi-lens analytical approach. From sociological theories, I draw upon functionalism for understanding education, socialization, and integration functions. Further, I draw upon conflict theory for analyzing structural inequalities and power dynamics. What does it say? It says that society is not peaceful, there are conflicts. How Karl Marx divided the society between bourgeois and proletariats. In context of education, we can see similarity that rich students get better opportunities while poor ones lag behind. Further, I draw upon symbolic interactionism for stakeholder meaning making. The integration of state capacity theory, civil society engagement models, and institutional compliance mechanisms further explain the multi-stakeholder policy implementation in federal governance contexts. Though I have studied a lot of literatures, but I'd like to quote Amartya Sen. He, in his book Development as Freedom, talks about capability approach. And this aligns with RTE by framing deprivation as capability deprivation. And Reza Sen also talk about public action and capability perspective in their famous work, India, Development and Participation. Here, this work of theirs resonates with Section 12(1)(c) of the RTE Act as a corrective measure for inclusion. Further, I have dealt a lot of literatures. Again, there are a lot of scholarly debates regarding this. If I talk about methodological justification, so my philosophical stance is pragmatism, privileging methodological pluralism for addressing complex implementation questions. As I mentioned earlier, that I have employed a convergent, parallel, mixed method design, giving equal emphasis to both quantitative surveys as well as qualitative interviews, integrated through triangulation. So the quantitative component, it enabled statistical hypothesis validation regarding enrollment trends, regarding infrastructure compliance and demographic patterns. While the qualitative component captured contextual stakeholder perceptions, implementation barriers, the government dynamics, the nuanced experiences of quantitative methods that could not reveal has been highlighted by the qualitative method. So this integration, it enhances the validity and offers a more comprehensive understanding of multidimensional policy implementation phenomena. Further, I draw upon data collection, sampling methods. If we talk about the study population, so students aged between 6 to 14 years of age, teachers, school administrators and government officials of Pune district were interviewed, and multiple stakeholder groups were also there. Now, talking about the qualitative component, semi-structured key informant interviews was conducted that included the district education officer of Pune, district magistrate of Pune, DPO, retired IS officers, and further they suggested the challenges, they highlighted the challenges, they gave policy recommendations, and their interview it highlighted the contextual richness of this study. And talking about ethical considerations, of course, informed consent and voluntary participation was maintained throughout the data collection. Further, in drawing upon analytical methods, as mentioned, it involved descriptive statistics, frequency distribution, percentage for demographic and academic variable. MANOVA was used, multivariate analysis of variances, SPSS software for statistical procedures, and qualitative analysis was done through thematic. Initially, I interviewed 15 to 18 government officials, all those that I have mentioned. So I converted the interviews into transcripts. Then I reread the transcripts, color coded them. Then I derived 58 initial codes and put it under themes and sub-themes. Further, I identified the themes, did theme review and refined those themes, and finally compiled them as a report generation, and with that led to theoretical saturation. So data triangulation was done, integration of quantitative findings and qualitative themes to validate the hypothesis and enhance the interpretation robustness. So we can say that this method, it enhanced the credibility of the conclusions regarding multi-stakeholder implementation dynamics, revealing both convergence as well as divergence patterns across data sources. Now talking about key empirical findings as per quantitative analysis, and male students were there, 42% female, 85% of the teachers were aware of the RTE, still 33 vacant quota seats remained. Now, summing up the key findings from qualitative themes based on stakeholder interviews. The first is status and transition of RTE. Now, we can see here that the implementation is uneven, particularly in rural areas. Enrollment has increased, but quality is inconsistent. Progress coexists along with persistent challenges. The second challenge is issues for RTE. What we see here is that there are infrastructure deficits, teacher shortages are there, geographical barriers are there, uneven distribution across rural-urban divide. They hinder implementation of RTE. Talking about gender and enrollment ratio, enrollment and GER ratio. Private schools, they fail the 25% reservation mandate. They voluntarily don't want to admit students under this quota. Application procedures are also very complex and low beneficiary awareness as there that constraints up among eligible population. Fourth is the role of the stakeholders. Inconsistent state machinery outreach is observed. Proactive leadership that enhances compliance while civil society effectively bridges the awareness gaps. Now, successful implementation of RTE. We need more improved infrastructure, strict enforcement, and robust monitoring mechanisms at grassroots. And while talking about achievements of Pune, enrollment has increased, the academic ranking of Pune has also increased, and what we assess that multi-stakeholder collaboration is required to yield localized success. Now, if you talk about the triangulation findings, that validates the first hypothesis. Here, I would like to quote the District Education Officer, Sri Shivnath Rajakji, that I interviewed during November 2023. Even he quoted that the key to success lies in local administration's ability to engage with both schools and communities, ensuring that policy decisions are executed. So, from qualitative data and from quantitative data, they affirm the role of the state machinery, that its role is indispensable in successful implementation of Section 12(1)(c) of the RTE Act. Thus, we can see that the first hypothesis is validated. Coming towards the next hypothesis, about awareness, about engagement, institutional engagement. So, the qualitative analysis here also shows that parental literacy and poverty create persistent information barrier. In fact, this statement was also quoted by Dr. Ishwar Chandra Sharma, retired IAS and present administrative officer at BSEB, that is Bihar School Examination Board, during personal communication in April 2023. So the triangulation finding, they validate that civil society organization, they bridge critical gap, and they are in fact essential to improve outreach and awareness. Now the third hypothesis regarding institutional engagement also turns to be essential as indicated by both the data strands. This we have already discussed, status and transition of RTE, already discussed. Coming towards findings. So we can see that there has been measurable increase in enrollment, indicating that RTE has been effective in expanding access. The study finds that infrastructure deficits, teacher shortages remain major constraints. A substantial proportion of schools lack basic facilities that directly affects the quality of education and student retention. And one of the most critical findings relate with Section 12(1)(c), that despite high levels of poverty, a significant number of seats remain vacant. Now, this is due to low awareness among beneficiaries, procedural complexities, and socio-economic compulsions rather than lack of demand. The research highlights that awareness is a decisive factor. Beneficiaries who are informed are far more likely to access educational provisions. And in this context, civil society organizations, they play a crucial role in bridging information gaps and facilitating access. Further, the findings also underscore that effective implementation is strongly linked to governance and stakeholder cooperation. Areas with active administrative engagement and civil society involvement showed better compliance and higher enrollment outcomes. So finally, the study concludes that education under RTE often remains limited to formal access, while substantive inclusion, ensuring meaningful participation, equity, quality learning remains insufficiently realized. Based on the findings, my recommendations focus on strengthening awareness, strengthening governance, infrastructure, stakeholder cooperation to make inclusive education under RTE Act more effective. So we can see that there is a more need of targeted awareness. Strong campaigns are necessary, especially for marginalized communities. And in fact, information about provisions such as Section 12(1)(c) should be disseminated through locally accessible channels, such as community outreach or grassroots organizations, rather than relying solely on newspaper. What happens that marginalized people, where they are not able to afford twice a meal a day, how is it even possible for them to purchase a newspaper in which advertisements come regarding RTE? So localized dissemination of information is required. Secondly, the government must increase and rationalize funding for school infrastructure and ensure that all basic norms such as classrooms, sanitation, drinking water, separate washrooms for both the genders, these essential qualities are met, these essential needs are met. That will retain both quality of education also and students also. And further, I can say that there is a more need for strengthened monitoring and accountability mechanisms. Regular audits should be there. transparent fund utilization should be there. Surprise visits and stricter enforcement of RTE norms can improve the compliance. So the admission process should also be simplified, reducing the procedural barriers. Finally, there is need to move beyond mere access and focus on substantive inclusion, ensuring that children are not just enrolled but are able to participate, learn, and thrive in an equitable environment. So I can conclude that we can conclude that the Right to Education Act has laid a strong foundation, but the real challenge that lies in transforming legal rights into lived realities. Inclusive education is not just about bringing children into schools, but ensuring that they learn, they belong, they thrive. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to defend this doctoral work before the distinguished academicians. I now look forward for the academic exchange of ideas.
Thank you, Kanak, for an excellent presentation. State basis, as I said, I am running out of time. I'll give my critical input, but before that, I have some questions and queries, and that is, to begin with, which I normally ask from all the scholars, that what inspired you to work on this topic? Definitely, there might be some reason to choose the topic when a researcher selects a topic. So what inspired you to choose this topic?
So thank you for the insightful question, sir. So my motivation for this study, it actually emerges from a convergence of early observation, intellectual engagement, and I can say a normative commitment to educational equity. Like growing up, I occasionally noticed that children of similar age groups, they are engaged in work rather than schooling. That I can say that raised initial awareness, initial questions about unequal access to education. And as I progressed academically, these observations, they evolved into a more structured inquiry through engagement with education policy, right-based frameworks, particularly the Right to Education Act. So this led me to reflect upon the gap between normative promise of inclusive education and its uneven realization in practice, especially in marginalized contexts. And as we all are academicians, so this work also I can say that carries academic responsibility for us to, we should contribute to improvise the quality of education as far as possible. So given its central role in social transformation, so I think that this interest was the intersection of personal observation, theoretical curiosity, and academic responsibility that ultimately inspired me to pursue this research work.
Brilliant. Another question that I would like to know from you, that since you have used a lot of statistical tools, triangulation methods, and I have seen the methodological robustness in your work, which makes it quite distinct. What I would like to know from you is that what is new findings that you could locate through your work? Because I have gone through many research on RTE, and what we find that there are some common, some very general kind of things, like the way you pointed out that 25% enrollment is not taking place in private institutions. Apart from that, what is new that you could locate, you could find out in your work?
Yes, sir. So the key gap identified in my work that lies between the disconnect between a normative framework of Right to Education Act and its actual implementation at the grassroots level. While the Act provides comprehensive right-based structure for inclusive education, my study, it reveals that effectiveness that is being significantly constrained by awareness deficits, administrative limitations, and socioeconomic barriers. And This research highlights inclusive education as is often reduced to formal access, while substantive inclusion ensuring participation, awareness, equitable outcomes that remain inadequately addressed. Further, there has been macro level studies regarding national level study regarding Purnia. This is the first research that is a micro level, and that is based upon Purnia district. It is a concise research. It's a deep, in-depth study regarding Purnia district. So I can say that this is my major contribution. This is the finding. And also I have analyzed the role of state, civil society interactions that has not been done earlier in earlier research. So.
Okay, so these are some of the questions that I have asked. The comment that I have to give, that the topic of your research is inclusive education role of the state and civil society. So far as civil society component is concerned, even in the course of your presentation, the chapterization, it is missing. So it is mentioned, somewhere here and there. But so far as civil society is concerned, it has a very significant role to play. So what I think that once you bring it out in the form of a book, I think you should dedicate some more space to the civil society. Apart from that, so far as the literature review is concerned, literature review is something which is a very fundamental part of research. Of course, you have highlighted, you have mentioned about it, but what I think that a little more, rigorous analysis or rigorous review of literature was required. So it should be taken in. The rest, I have found this work very interesting and very good contribution to the existing body of literature. And I have nothing more to ask. I mean, floor is open if anyone wants to ask questions, but please think about the my constraints. I have a conference. I have a meeting to attend. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Anupa, please,
Ma'am, you are not audible. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us the precious time, also accommodating, this constraint of time. So I'll open to the house. If there are any questions on a short basis, please come forward. Any questions? Otherwise, I have just one short question. There is this very significant phenomenon in politics of Bihar, that is reservation for women in the grassroots, that is Panchayat Raj institutions. And when we have these women as representatives, they are the mothers mostly. And how about the role of mothers in the RTE implementation, in incorporating, bringing the children to the school? Has that brought in some kind of impact? Your comments, Kanak.
Yes, ma'am. I have dealt regarding this in my second hypothesis, how parental awareness, how family income, family awareness plays a pivotal role in bridging this inclusion gap. If parents are educated, they send their children to school. If they are the intended beneficiaries, the parents are the intended beneficiaries, if they are aware of the provisions regarding RTE, if they are aware of section 12(1)(c), then they can derive benefits of the provisions of the government. And we have seen in our research that parents who are aware, they are able to avail this landmark legislation benefits. So education of women, obviously being the head of the family, is really important. If they are educated, they educate generations to come, and they can also offer better education to their upcoming generation. And of course, they can derive benefits of these plans of the government.
Thank you, Kanak. That is some kind of process. Observation that you had on the role of the functionaries, Panchayat Raj functionaries. Do I have any more questions from the house? Otherwise, I seek the permission of our respected person.
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Yes.
Ma'am, just a couple of interventions. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tanya Banerjee, a research scholar. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick note that I thought that if you could, have said more about the public and the private institutions and the discrepancies of between that in terms of the number of school or which year you were comparing, and also a comparative study in Purnia itself. The pre and the post implementation on that part. And also, I think the recommendations that you have mentioned, they are mostly in the tangible and the physical aspects that you have talked about. Now, going back to this, when you talk about the symbolic interactionism, so there a major focus is on the language, the symbols, the self, and the socialization. So, would you like to include some intangible assets or the intangible recommendations which are also important? And I think in this context, as our respective sir also said that when we talk about the civil society, I think being a political science student, we cannot ignore the tenets of Neera Chandok and the limits of civil society in terms of implementation of RT. So how much has the civil society there has been able to improve the situation, or rather has it accentuated or exacerbated the entire conundrum of the education system in Purnia? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya, for your in-depth question. I would like to quote the figures of RT, that of Bihar, that before RT, there was 46.9% people were enrolled, according to the 2001 census. And if we talk about 2011 census, after RT, it raised to 61.8%. And the present literacy rate is near about 70 to 74%. So we can see that 15% increase is seen. And in fact, if we talk about enrollment, before RT, 80 to 85% enrollment was there, and post RT, 95% enrollment was there. Nearly, we can say that it's nearly universal enrollment. And if we talk about Purnia, that is my universe of research, it is lagging behind. 51% literacy rate is there in Purnia. But post RTE, GER has also increased 12% after RTE. So we can say that, and while you talked about the tenure, I have done a longitudinal study from 2010 till 2022 that I've already mentioned. I'm talking about the role of the civil society. I have dealt in my entire thesis that how it acts as a bridge, how it acts as a facilitator, how the legislative policies of the government of this landmark legislation, they have been conveyed to the beneficiaries. So the intended beneficiaries are aware. This I have already dealt in my hypothesis itself also. How pivotal is the role of the civil society in getting these things addressed. So I can say that civil society, it acts as a facilitator. And education, it's for me, I perceive education not as a privilege but as a right. And civil society also plays a pivotal role in bridging the inclusion gap and acting as a facilitator to the marginalized section of the people in giving them their rights, in giving them admitted into schools.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for responding, Kanak. That was a long one. And sir is constrained about time. He has a meeting. So, before I had the permission, sir, she responded to all the questions and the comments and observation. Your permission to award her the degree of Ph.D. After you give the permission, we congratulate her.
Yes, a very brilliant question was raised by a research scholar, Tanya. It's nice to see that some brilliant students are enrolled there for research. Of course, it's a very precious moment in the life of any researcher who has spent 3-4 years or 5 years, valuable years, and they reach this far. And of course, Kanak has really worked hard, and the way she responded to all the questions and queries, she truly deserves to be awarded with the Ph.D. degree. And I congratulate her and strongly recommend her that she may be awarded with the Ph.D. degree of Patna University. I think I'm forgetting the name. It is Patna University. And my congratulations to her. And I think she may, of course, after fulfilling all the necessary requirements, terms and conditions that university had, she may be awarded with the Ph.D. degree. And I would like to be the first to call her Dr. Kanak Priya. So definitely, we need to.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us in valuable time. Thank you.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
congratulations, Kanak Priya, now Dr. Kanak Priya. Yes. Particle science. Thank you, sir. Thanks for
Okay.
joining.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
लीड करो तुम काम कर रहे हो लीड करो